Hello, our story begins in 81 BBY, at the core of the galaxy, Coruscant, home of the Jedi, Senate, and all the power in the universe. To some, that power was to be respected, adhered to, and represented with patriotism. For others, that power was as superficial as the political promises of those who ran it. The Republic was a dying institution, one that would soon be displaced. The student of the Sith Lord was moving through Coruscant on his own. He wasn't working under his master's direct orders, rather his own personal aspirations. The Sith Grand Plan had been in action for nearly 1,000 years, and despite Plagueis thinking highly of his master, it was purposeless to think that the 5th Sith Lord would find victory. Plagueis was currently tracking 2 Jedi in the lower levels of the city. A young Jedi Padawan and his master were on a mission. Shortly before Plagueis got into this position, he bumped into the Jedi Padawan, using an undercover outfit. He pulled a bit of arm hair off the Jedi as he moved by. It was a very delicate procedure. The Sith Apprentice was lurking behind the 2 Jedi, watching the Padawan. He was only days away from becoming a Jedi Knight, but in Plagueis' mind, if he could get close to the student of the Grand Master, perhaps there was something he could do to take the Jedi down. Plagueis squeezed around corners, listening to the 2 Jedi as they spoke about mundane things. They were doing some upkeep in the lower levels of the city planet, and despite the Jedi believing it was righteous, it was plain and simply just arduous work for them. They never got anything done by doing this. They were just prolonging the inevitable suffering of the people down here. Plagueis looked down at his bag where he placed Dooku's hair into it. He just needed a little bit of a connection. He now had it. The Jedi Grand Master and his final student eventually finished up their little mission and escaped to the top side of the surface. It would be following this mission that Dooku would become a Jedi Knight. It was a prideful moment for Master and Apprentice. The young man was excited. At 21 years old, he couldn't help but look forward to the future. He still had hope in his eyes. He hadn't seen what the Republic truly was. He wasn't exactly like Grandmaster Yoda, but to the Sith Apprentice, all that mattered was what he could do with the bond between Master and Apprentice. Plagueis took the heir to his miniature lair on Coruscant. It was an apartment behind a bar on the lower east side of the city. He moved in, passed his good friend, the bartender, and walked into his altar. As his alter ego, not the one based on his actual alternative personality, he could come in and act like one of the patrons. Plagueis was operating with 3 identities: Hager Damask II, heir to Damask Holdings and closing in on becoming a trillionaire, which was currently known as Hoppy the Cat, a simple mercenary, and of course, the Sith Apprentice, Plagueis. The bartender always called him Hops, and it was endearing and charming enough for the Sith Lord to tolerate. Plagueis set down his bag and removed his overcoat and prepared himself, a Sith ritual. He took pieces of hair and layered them into the Sith altar in the room. Despite the bartender thinking that this was something else, Plagueis kept it on the down low. This was his religious belief. He liked altars, but they didn't present any real power. That's all the bartender needed to know. To him, it was superstitions. But if Hops needed to be a good mercenary and this helped, then who cares? They were on good terms. The deal was, Hops paid no rent and he would protect the bar. Plagueis could have bought the bar. For a matter of fact, he could have probably bought out every business in the Lower East Side. But he didn't. It was a bit humorous in his opinion to be quote-unquote living here for free when he could buy the skyscraper above it, with nearly no cost to him. Enough about that. Plagueis delved into his work and began huffing the burning sensations of the Sith fire. It was like air to him. He couldn't breathe without the dark eminence. He chanted quietly in the dialect of the Sith, murmuring as he did. Inside the Jedi Temple, Dooku was walking when he felt a chill roll down his spine, but he thought it was nothing. He walked from the hangar bay to the training corridors. Plagueis could see every move he made. Dooku watched some people train before leaving and strolling about the temple, eating in the mess hall, attempting some meditation inside the botanical garden, and then afterwards going to his personal room. His mind was racing, wondering when he might become a Jedi Knight. It wouldn't be until later that night that he did become that Knight. It was a huge accomplishment for him, and he couldn't be prouder of it. For the young Jedi, it was time to begin the next leg of his journey. Did he want to become a master immediately, or did he fancy something else? In Dooku's mind, it made sense to wait for his moment to come. But without having his master, where was he supposed to go? Dooku tried to meditate on it, and instead of finding the comforting aura of the Force, he was tapping into something he never felt before. There was a calling to him, but as any true Jedi would, he resisted. The pool or apparition presented itself as an answer. Dooku, as a young Jedi, sometimes felt inadequate. This wasn't anything from his master or his studies. He was just very hard on himself. It was like the allure to this pool was an answer to that. There wasn't anything he truthfully questioned, so it added to even more curiosity for him. Sure, he had things he wondered about or was even curious about, but he would never ask or try to find those answers. Instead of going to the pool, he resisted and continued his meditation. This continued though. It wasn't just a meditation-exclusive thing. There was a constant itch, and Plagueis made sure it was as irritating as it could be. To find the itch, he needed to use the pool. If he didn't, it would continue to bother him. Plagueis didn't spend his time working on this ritual, so when he was playing his master's games, the itch became less noticeable to Dooku, and then suddenly it would flare up. It ironically led to more of a mental break for Dooku than it would have been if it was just dealing with a continuous buzz. This for Dooku meant that when he was able to get rid of the itch, he would remember what he did. When it came back, he would do what he did before, then it wouldn't work, so he would try something else, and then that would work. It was a continuous cycle of annoyance for him. He couldn't seem to get away from it, and despite how good of a relationship he and his master had, he didn't want to be coming to his master every other day with a new problem. As a knight, he had to have the mental fortitude to figure this out on his own, so he would do that. For months, it was a continuous back and forth, and then it stopped. Plagueis was fairly impressed, but he knew that Dooku was the Grand Master's student. He wouldn't be easy to break through. The benefit the Sith had was patience. Each member of the Rule of Two had to be patient. Their entire game was passing the torch to the next generation so they could continue the plan. It would be within Plagueis' lifetime that he could gain control over the Republic and destroy the Jedi. He just needed to finish his own personal endeavors. Due to Dooku resisting so well, Hego Damask was put onto the floor. He was sent to make dealings with the Trade Federation. As an alter personality, he was able to convince the members of the Trade Federation that a deal with Damask Holdings would be a beneficial advance for them. If they put credits into it, then they would get credits out of it. The big thing he was proposing was essentially laundering. The Republic could financially crack down on the Trade Federation. At this point in time, the Republic was still semi-coherent, so they could see the Trade Federation as a proper monopoly and try to remove some of its power. In Hego's mind, establishing a relationship with the Trade Federation would be the perfect way to build a repertoire with a business that could create an army. Not that Hego at this point planned on doing any big-time wars, he was just interested in the prospect of building alliances. The Trade Federation's council was a little on edge about this, but Hego was able to make the deal, certifying what had already been a pretty peaceful relationship with the Trade Federation. The Sith, after all, still needed to ensure they had longtime allies. In his return to his master, Plagueis told Tenebrous that everything was going well. His Sith master was a genuine mastermind, but there was this unspoken thing between the two of them. They kind of knew that Plagueis might be the one to go the distance. There just wasn't any true confirmation around whether or not that would be true, but the two of them continued going off of Tenebrous's plans. While this was happening, Plagueis started working on a new step of his plan. Since Dooku wasn't led astray by the itch, he needed the young Jedi to have a friend, an apparition to trust. What he did was create yet another alter ego, but this time he used the power to manifest a different look. By this point, there was no use for the alter ego of hopping a cat, so Plagueis abandoned the bar after taking all of his supplies and leaving the poor bartender to die. He'd eventually get gutted by a ring of gunrunners who wanted to use his back room as a safe house. He rejected and paid the price. Plagueis, with this apparition, came up with a new name, Foam Lisk. He would present himself to Dooku as this individual and start telling him things he knew, and giving him a friend to confide in. Dooku would be none the wiser. While Dooku wasn't exactly the first person to trust a non-Jedi, this was something he couldn't really resist, and it was intended to be that way. Because Plagueis spent so much time around Dooku's mind, he understood that to get inside of it, he needed to sell Dooku on a false narrative. So when Plagueis created a tragedy far away from the world of Coruscant, Dooku volunteered. Obviously, Plagueis would have abandoned the project if Dooku didn't come, but he got lucky on the first try. Dooku wanted to spend more time away from Coruscant. It would be in the upper mid-rim where this mission took place. Plagueis almost chose Megiddo, but it was too close to home. It was literally home, actually. If this didn't work, then using the alter ego of Hego Damask would be more beneficial. During this trip, Dooku would interact with the man who called himself Foam. He was very direct and to the point, similar in style to a hermit. He wore an out-of-style hat and spoke with a misguided tone. It was hypnotic, because every time they spoke, Dooku thought he would speak high, and then it went low, or the other way around. It was a constant rising and lowering of his personal guard. Foam preyed on Dooku's adolescence. Questions were thrown at Dooku, all in an effort to make him question himself. He didn't really understand everything that was happening, though. Dooku was on a solo mission to make an accord between a local government and a group of radicals that had a disagreement with her political stance. Dooku was doing fine with the overall mission. That wasn't the issue. The difficult thing for him was having Foam speaking to him consistently about his beliefs. The worst part is, Foam was a native of this world, so he had to be used as a guide around the planet. Plagueis used the Force extensively during this process, and while it was painful and strenuous, he used that pain to fuel himself to go further. Foam regarded Dooku as a good friend and thanked him for being a good Jedi, knowing that no other Jedi would have actually helped them out. Foam challenged every core belief Dooku held, and for the first time, his positive lens for the Jedi Order he loved so deeply had been shifted. Perhaps it had to do with the fact that he was trained by the Grand Master, but Dooku wasn't sure. Foam was really rancid about the Grand Master, referring to issues that happened hundreds of years before. Very minute mistakes that had a large effect on the people of the galaxy, individual systems, the Republic, or the Jedi. As a Sith, Plagueis was able to use Foam to fill Dooku's mind with the perception of the Sith, and since Foam was a very innocent elder man, one who claimed to be 200 years old, Dooku never took this man as a threat. Foam and Dooku spent about 3 weeks around each other. Tenebras and Plagueis didn't need to be in constant communication, because they trusted each other. So for those 3 weeks that Plagueis was quiet, there wasn't a single worry from Tenebras. He understood that having alternate identities was taxing, and how important they were for running the Jedi and the Republic into the ground. Tenebras had no clue that Plagueis was seducing a young Jedi inside the Order. When Dooku returned to Coruscant, he was confused. He didn't really have a basis of understanding for this entire thing. He knew that he would refuse to train another student for the time being, and he started doing more research on his own master. But Plagueis didn't want that. To allow Dooku to form his own opinion wasn't what he wanted. Dooku was meticulous with his decisions, and Plagueis by this point knew that. So in an effort to keep Dooku from making any important decisions, he started to poke at his brain. Meditations and sleep would be filled with the itch again. To Dooku this was really irritating, but it came after Foam spoke to him. On the world of Ord Trassi, where he spent the last 3 weeks of his life, Dooku learned about their understanding of the Force. Foam told Dooku that on their planet they believed the Force was an instinct. They never called it the Force. Instead, in their terminology, the Force was called impulse. There was once a religion of impulse users or monks on Ord Trassi, but they had been exterminated by the Jedi. It was intentional because the monks harvested the living Force and used it for darker tendencies to bend the will of the Force and then use that darkness. Foam regarded himself as the last impulse monk, which he really wasn't. They were already gone. They'd been dead for 160 years. And while Foam in Dooku's mind was real, no one on Ord Trassi knew of his existence, so they couldn't really claim that there were any monks still around. Even if they did know he was, they wouldn't say a word about it. Why expose the last of their religion to a Jedi Knight? Regardless, Dooku had to grapple with his emotions, and without a true opinion on the matter and the inability to find an answer, he felt stuck. Plagueis' Sith alchemy continued for years following this. It was a continuous back and forth. Every time Dooku formed an opinion, it was broken. Plagueis made the process as unnerving and as mentally tormenting as possible. Dooku tried everything. He went to Yoda, who gave him advice, and Dooku tried it. Because of these struggles, the young Jedi didn't really follow the typical Jedi path. Instead of becoming a master, he took Yoda's advice and took the Barash vow, going out to the Force-attuned world of Ossus to find his sanctuary. Even though it had been years since the itch started, Dooku never went for the pull. He allowed it to exist, but he rejected its darkness. On his Barash vow, he intended to fortify his mind and return to Coruscant without any questions on his opinions, motives, or loyalties. The opposite would happen. Plagueis would go to Ossus, and once again, Dooku's good friend, Foam Lisk, would show up to guide him. Dooku was obviously confused, but Foam told him that he felt an impulse. He could feel that his friend, the one who helped his people, was struggling. Dooku was confused by this. But for the next several years, starting in 79 BBY and going all the way till 64 BBY, they would stay together on Ossus. During this time, Foam continuously guided his friend, telling him his lessons on the Force. The irony is, Plagueis was teaching things in alignment with the Jedi, because on the surface level, Jedi and Sith were not that much different. Their greatest difference was their quest for greater power. Foam did leave Ossus a couple times during those years, and he left for extensive periods. He called them the impulse pilgrimages, ones that he, as the last of his kind, was required to follow until his eventual death. Dooku did find it odd that Foam never attempted to rebuild the monks' order, but Foam was against it, telling his young friend that they were destroyed for a reason. It was the will of the impulse that they fell out of existence. In his own way, as he told Dooku, he believed that his monk order was destroyed so that he could guide a young Jedi mind into the future. Dooku was manipulated by the one-on-one time, and despite the Grandmaster coming to visit him on very few occasions, their sessions got shorter and shorter over the years. Outside of Ossus, Darth Plagueis would destroy Darth Tenebrous, cementing himself as a Sith Lord, and he'd begin the training of a young Sith acolyte named Darth Sidious. Sheev Palpatine had promise, and it was in Plagueis' best interest to keep Sidious and the student he planned to call Tyrannus away from each other. Everything was going to go the way he wanted it to go, though the pride of young Sidious was what Plagueis found to be worrying. Not that pride wasn't good for a Sith, but someone like Palpatine could get too carried away with himself. In a circumstance where he did, that arrogance could lead to the belief in a Sith system without Plagueis. The Sith Lord understood that the Sith were best with the younger generation, but there would be no need for any younger generations if he could discover the secrets to true immortality. Plagueis would find it within his own body so that he didn't need to go into someone else's to remain eternal, but his main priority was the corruption of the Grand Master's final student. It worked, but it wasn't just a corruption, it was a complete and total mind capture. Plagueis understood that to manipulate Dooku would be fine, but if he could convince Dooku that the Jedi and the Sith were the same aside from what they presented, then he could sow dissension within his order. But this was only for a conscious Dooku. Plagueis would prey on a Dooku that was unconscious. He spent the last 15 years probing into Dooku's mind while he slept, manipulating his dreams, opinions, thoughts, and spirituality. All the while, the Grandmaster believed that his final student was becoming a true Jedi monk. The thing with Dooku was, he was intelligent, so Plagueis wouldn't take that away from him. To get Dooku to join the Sith was to be a conscious decision. It could not be done without his own will. So that's what Plagueis allowed him to do. Dooku returned from his Barash vow and he had aged significantly, but not in a bad way. He carried a beard and an even more proper demeanor, having now understood the lessons of the Force. Before Dooku left, his friend, Foam Lisk, died in his sleep, and with careful planning by Plagueis, he allowed Dooku to burn the body and allow his good friend to transfer over to the living Force. Dooku didn't realize that Foam was never there. Dooku's return to the temple started with chaos, but not because of his arrival. Well, it technically was, but he didn't know that. On the 6th night of Dooku's return, there was an assassination, one that didn't just strike down a needless or worthless Jedi, but one that cut down the Grand Master of the Jedi Order. When Dooku awoke and learned the news, he was heartbroken. He ran to his master's room and asked to see him, but there was hardly anything to see. Grandmaster Yoda was decapitated in his sleep. There was no knowledge of who did it. The security systems inside the temple had been shut down. There was no camera footage of any of the halls. At the same time, the vents were flush, and it caused the temple to turn into a fog-covered mist. Dooku was sleeping the entire time, so he never knew. While he was told truths and lies about his master during the Barash vow, Dooku never got the chance to speak with Yoda about these lies, or truths. So even though Dooku had issues with his master, there would be yet another itch, one not even forced through the Force, one that couldn't go away because the answers to the questions lay with a dead Jedi Master. But the issues didn't stop there. Following Yoda's assassination and the reaction from the Council, and of course the Senate who learned about it pretty rapidly, there was another incident, this time involving the next Master of the High Council, one that would have replaced Yoda, Master Oppo Rencesis. The Jedi Temple went into lockdown. The temple was usually filled with Jedi, senators, representatives, and business executives, and it became a lockdown facility, with police forces and temple guards actively on duty. Dooku tried to be an assistance, because despite what Foam told him, and what he currently believed, he was still a Jedi at heart. This was very intentional. Dooku went to the council to assist with what he could, but they were still trying to figure this out. Masters Jocasta and Sunube decided to make Dooku one of their investigative Jedi, one who could go around during the evening and search for killers, and despite this involvement, another Jedi would be killed in their sleep, this time just a knight. But there was a problem. This Jedi Knight was Sifo Dyas, Dooku's childhood best friend, and just like that, the two closest people to Dooku inside the Jedi Order were killed. This continued for weeks, until all of a sudden, it stopped. The Jedi Council lost another member, and the Jedi investigators kept getting nowhere. It was because the Sith Lord was able to manipulate an unconscious Dooku to be exactly what they were, unnoticeable. The Sith of the Bane era had done brilliant things. Among them was walking directly into the Jedi Temple without anyone noticing, and Plagueis had no doubt that he could make the Jedi pay for what obstructed them centuries before. Due to the killings being so sporadic, the Jedi didn't know when a strike might happen, but when it stopped, they kept looking, and the Jedi investigators, under the guide of a temple guard, found the culprit. It was a shame too. because despite Dooku not being totally aware that he was involved in the deaths of his best friends, he did know that the person accused of being the perpetrator was innocent. It was a Rodian Jedi, who was removed from the Jedi Order and eventually executed by the Republic. The Council reacted perfectly fine, promoting the Temple Guard to their council and moving on from the incident after a large funeral for all the claimed lives. Dooku was so confused. He believed in the Jedi. Despite what Film had said regarding Yoda's failure or the attack against the Impulse monks, there wasn't any evidence to support the Jedi automatically being the bad guys. It was a mistake, but this one, the one supported by the Council and resulting in the death of one of the nicer Jedi in the Order, was unnerving to Dooku. It was on this doubt in the Jedi that Plagueis personally preyed on. For the last 18 or so years, Plagueis abused Dooku from alternative personalities. He now introduced himself to Dooku as an ally himself. Dooku at this point, especially after the emotional burnout of losing his three closest friends in Foam, Yoda, and Sith, was ready to give up. The entire investigative series was unprecedented. Plagueis assured the young Jedi that he could persevere, but if he wanted to truly succeed, there were darker attributes that he could play off of. Dooku, desperate for answers and desperate for an ally, fled to Plagueis' side, but as a Jedi. Plagueis told Dooku to avoid leaving the Order and stay strong. There were ideas and strengths that were given to Dooku, but all of this was done from the mindset of a dark side user. Plagueis never identified himself as a Sith. He just told Dooku what it was he did and what he used. Plagueis was a humble man, who worked dedicatedly to maintain peace, but he struggled because of the Jedi and the Republic. The unity of the Jedi and the Republic made it impossible to sow peace between those struggling and those with power. Plagueis was a martyr, and Dooku believed that his work was honest. Plagueis suggested that Dooku try to become a council member, and if he could see what the Jedi were really doing. With about a week transpiring between Dooku meeting Plagueis and the death of the Rodian Jedi, Dooku returned to the temple and was approached by the former lead temple guard, the one who had recently joined the council. He expressed that Dooku had done well during their investigation, and despite only being a knight, he and the council wanted to extend an invitation to him to the council. Dooku found this surprising and admitted that he felt like he didn't do enough. The temple guard disagreed, expressing that if it wasn't for Dooku's claim that these kills had to be connected, the Jedi wouldn't have ever found the Rodian to be guilty. The truth is, Yoda, Sith, and a couple of the other Jedi had been working around this Rodian as of late. Even further than that, Plagueis was completely aware of it. He had been speaking to the Rodian on other missions, long before Dooku returned from Ossus, so the Rodian had been set up for about a year, and everything was working against Dooku's mind. Plagueis continued to pull at the young Jedi, and he didn't even know it. The greatest thing about this was because Dooku lost consciousness during these kills, it was Plagueis who got to enjoy being a Sith. All the while, with Dooku ascending to the High Council and continuing the long game of his plan, Sidious was excelling rapidly through the Sith Acolyte training. As a council member, Dooku continued to work on behalf of the Order. He watched them work closely with the Senate, which he personally didn't like. But yet again, Dooku became a tool for the Sith. Plagueis' alchemy only got better on Ossus, and he was able to fully master it at this point. Now, he pushed Dooku to do unthinkable things. It never occurred during council sessions, but Dooku would change his code plugins with other council members when they weren't looking, a bait and switch. He would go to a couple Jedi Knights and ask them to walk with him, and then dispatch them to a location in the mid-rim or core to do a political mission. He would then use the other council members' code to plug in the details of the mission and then return the code to the master again when they weren't looking. While Dooku was doing this unconsciously, he was also making copies of these codes and chain links so that it would be identified as the other Jedi Master's code when it was plugged in. These missions for the unlucky Jedi Dooku dispatched without control over his mind always resulted in death, whether it be the Jedi starting an uprising, getting killed in hyperspace disasters, killed by bounty hunters, or by Sidious and Plagueis. The common denominator of each of these occurrences was the Jedi went to a planet to do good. They would do bad, hurt the political landscape of the planet and the political image of the Jedi, and then disappear. The Sith had been covering up Jedi deaths for centuries, and now it looked like the Jedi Council members were doing it themselves. They were sending Jedi out into the galaxy to get slaughtered and then mess up the political image of the Jedi Order. Because this was all done by Plagueis, Dooku kept coming to Jedi Council sessions with confusion. The Jedi were doing terrible things, and council members were being reported for doing it and sending out Jedi on those missions. Their codes were plugged into the archives for the mission updates. It was a repeat and mirror to the assassination trail that went cold a couple months back. To the conscious Dooku, this didn't make sense. The Jedi were bumbling idiots as it seemed, and he was completely outraged. How could they be so blind or ignorant? If the code was put in, then it had to be that Jedi. None of the Jedi, especially in the Council, realized that there was an imposter among them. Dooku tried to help, but it kept revolving around in circles. To many of the Council members, they trusted Dooku more than anyone else. Currently acting Grand Master, Yariel Poof, suspended any travel to and from the temple. The entire facility was being locked down. The Jedi that weren't inside the Council were equally as confused. Missions by the Council that weren't undercover were known by pretty much everyone. Not that they would blow a horn and tell everyone about it, it was just accessible knowledge to everyone. The Jedi Council didn't hide things unless it was an undercover mission. So what people were confused about was this. The Jedi Council had 3 or 4 members who were consistently sending Jedi Knights and Masters out into the galaxy in squads of 3 to 6. These squads of Jedi interfered in local politics on each of these missions, resulting in galactic attention, especially from Coruscant. Before these Jedi could return home, they were killed in one way or another, which left the Jedi not from the Council confused, because none of the Council members accused of doing exactly what their chain codes said they did admitted to doing it. The Council was confused and frustrated because someone was obviously lying, and it had to be one of the 5 members who were constantly sending Jedi out on these missions. Within the span of 4 months, the Jedi lost the initial batch of 7 Jedi to an assassin, and now they lost 110 Jedi to a faulty mission by the Council. These weren't sporadic missions either, they were back to back to back. No one knew how to address it, because there was no playbook for this type of behavior. But for Dooku, and for a lot of Jedi in the Order, they wanted answers. Answers that they could not get because no one knew what was happening. Dooku's faith for the Jedi had been shattered. Any chance at saving the Order felt lost, and with the Senate breathing down the neck of the Council, they needed to react. The issue is, despite the Jedi arguing consistently about who did what, there was a miniature alliance being formed. One of the Council members had an alibi. They were working with students in a training hall. Another Jedi was in the cafe with a bunch of his peers. One of the other counselors was inside the admin room, speaking to a number of political allies in the Senate when the log was put in. Another Jedi was in medbay with droids because they hurt themselves during a spar session. The last of the Jedi was the most worrisome. They'd been in the electrical room of the Jedi Temple. They were assisting some Republic maintenance workers with repairs that the Jedi needed to power the far north corner of the temple, one that didn't have AC working. So with so many different alibis, the other Council members, the ones not involved in any of this, saw these mini alliances as potential proof that multiple Jedi were behind these faulty missions. It didn't just stop there though. These 5 Jedi had backups of friends and teachers from across the temple, saying that they would never do these things. Now it wasn't just 5 suspects, there were hundreds of potential people behind this. Master Shinube called upon the former lead temple guard and Dooku to begin a new investigation. It was nightmarish, because once the temple was locked down, no one could get in or out. Plagueis again began his ring of assassinations. It continued to only get worse exponentially, and for Dooku, he wasn't understanding why this kept happening. The thing with Dooku was Plagueis was able to gain access to his mind whenever he was meditating or sleeping. Dooku, especially after his trip to Ossus, spent a lot more time meditating in a private chamber in the temple, so Jedi would see him go into that chamber every day and they would see him leave. He had an alibi from dozens of Jedi who saw him go into that room to meditate, but Plagueis was able to use the vents in that chamber to get out and carefully do what he needed to do. Sometimes, very rarely, he would pull Dooku when he was actually walking around and active, but Plagueis always made sure to put Dooku to sleep before he disconnected, so if Dooku was walking around and lost consciousness, he'd wake up in his bed, left with the assumption that he was just really tired. Because that would happen with him on Ossus multiple times, and so he got used to calling that normal. He'd be with Palm, and the next thing he knew, there was a campfire in front of him in a completely different time of day. Plagueis normalized abnormalities to Dooku, and he couldn't help but follow it. Dooku's conscious mind was an array of confusion. The Jedi Order clearly couldn't handle this investigation, and as the divide between Jedi grew more tense, Dooku tried to reasonably stop it. While a lot of Jedi liked him and trusted him, his cleanliness made some of the other Council members that were being judged right now feel that he could be behind it. Dooku seemed too good to be true. First he helped capture the Rodian Jedi, then he's assigned to the Council, and then he doesn't pick a side because he morally doesn't feel it's right without plausible evidence? Dooku consciously recognized that the counselors who used their chain codes were responsible in some way, but he didn't put blame towards any one of them. So because Dooku remained neutral, he was targeted because he could be swayed to save the other Jedi. The situation was maddening, with the temple going into its 5th week of lockdown and the murders of Jedi skyrocketing to 21 deaths. In that time, tensions bubbled up. Because Dooku couldn't leave, he tried to maintain peace with everything, but there was no peace. Without a chance to get out of this hell and return to normalcy, the first blade was drawn on another Jedi, and a skirmish resulted in another 10 Jedi dying, with 14 more having to go to medbay. What made things even more terrible is one of the Jedi Council members, one that Plagueis had been using extensively, was going to be the nail in the coffin for the Jedi Order. Due to heightened defenses in the temple, one needed an access code to get into the medical bay. Dooku unconsciously used the Jedi's code to get in, and then slaughtered everyone. Not just Jedi, but medical droids and destroyed equipment before quickly launching himself into the ceiling vent and vanishing. These deaths would stoke the flames of a true Jedi civil war, and Dooku, in the conscious, would watch it all unfold. It would be his decision to go to his friend Plagueis. He would go to him in a panic, and Plagueis would take Dooku away from the chaos. The galaxy was forced to watch the Jedi Order turn on itself and crumble. The Civil War killed thousands of Jedi. Those who didn't fight ran like Dooku, and without a true order within the Jedi, Sidious was sent out to kill them. It would be with Plagueis that Dooku would be transformed into the Acolyte of Darkness. All of his choices led him to this moment, and despite so much manipulation taking place, it was through Dooku's will that he joined the Sith, and he would watch for months as the Jedi Order he once loved tore itself apart and separated into different sects, each vying for control over their former order. There were those who wanted peace, but it was too late, and in the time it took for them to stop killing each other, Dooku became a Sith. He saw the Jedi with pity and expressed his desires to do good in the galaxy. Plagueis promised him that he would do good. Thanks to all the Sith alchemy used to control Dooku and create Foamlisk's apparition, Plagueis was prepared to move to the next leg of his own personal studies. While he was training two students away from each other, he planned on uniting their power to see which one of them would be best for him. The irony is, Palpatine and Dooku were exactly what he wanted. The issue with Dooku was the fact that he was a former Jedi. Though similar to how Jedi saw him before the Order fell, the people of the Senate saw him as the Golden Boy. He was the young mind who wasn't responsible for the failure, and due to him being the youngest on the Council, he was regarded as too young to solve those issues, especially with 5 new groups of Jedi emerging from the wreckage. Point being, Plagueis believed that with either of them, he could do well as a Sith and Sith Apprentice. 2.5 years after the collapse of the Jedi Order, in the year 60 BBY, the Jedi had 2 remaining sects, balanced as all things should be, 2 Sith Apprentices and 2 Jedi sects. Plagueis told Tyrannus to destroy one, and Sidious to destroy the other. These last 2 won their civil war, and agreed on peace, but they needed more time before reunifying. What was even more ironic about everything was Plagueis technically didn't need to turn Tyrannus and Sidious against each other. There were nomad Jedi out in the galaxy, many of which falling closer and closer to darkness. He could take advantage of their weaknesses if he wanted. Instead of showing mercy though, as a true Sith, Plagueis would force Sidious and Tyrannus into a fight, after both of them cleaned house against 2 groups of Jedi beaten down by an emotionally devastating and physically tolling war. When it was finished, Plagueis instructed both Sith acolytes to return to a neutral location, which was a plateau on Ryloth. Sidious technically came in with the advantage, being that he spent more time on the dark side, but Dooku was a generational duelist, even with the Barash vow. Their duel started immediately, 3 red lightsabers clashing at each other. Palpatine was a remarkable foe. His skills were unmatched by any in the galaxy, but on a flat plateau surface, the 2 Sith had to fight on even ground. Their environment wouldn't benefit each other. Dooku started the fight and continued with it with one hand behind his back. Even with Sidious using 2 lightsabers, Dooku didn't hesitate with his defenses. He simply stepped back and blocked what came his way, avoiding whatever else came at him. Dooku masterfully and confidently controlled the battlefield. Sidious was faulty because he knew that Dooku was a former Jedi, and didn't expect him to go toe-to-toe with him. Sidious had been killing Masters a lot as of lately, and Dooku never ascended past the rank of Knight, so he had to be weak. Sidious's immediate issue was judging a book by its cover, and despite Dooku being 20 or so years older than Palpatine, he came in with no judgments or reserves about the young duelist. Their strikes were precise, and Dooku used his proper element to maintain absolute domination. Once Sidious realized Dooku's defenses were too good to stop, he was cut down within a matter of strikes. Tyrannus would bow to Plagueis, and they would certify their bond as master and apprentice. While Dooku's transformation into Tyrannus was based around emotional manipulation, his politically charged mind and genuine brilliance was put to the test in the political arena before this duel ever started. Plagueis, in the years since Dooku left, placed him on Sereno to gain reputation, and with the power of Count, he became not just the leader of the world, but senator for his planet as Sereno became a part of the Republic. Following the duel with Palpatine, Dooku would be tasked with ascending the roles of leadership within the Senate. This for him was relatively easy. He was able to gain trust with ease. Dooku became a spokesperson for the people, as Plagueis and his student, without having to worry about the Jedi, worked dedicatedly to take power from the Senate. Thanks to Hago's longtime allies in the Trade Federation, this was fairly easy of a task. Away from the political and financial dealings, Tyrannus was fiercely loyal to Plagueis. His bond with his master ensured that he would never feel inclined to betray him. Dooku sincerely wanted his bond with Plagueis to last forever, because it was his master who saved him in his mind. And with their usage of the Force, they would bend its will to become eternal beings. In the process of doing so, the Force would react by creating a child a galaxy away. But without the Jedi Order, and nomad Jedi falling away from their path, Anakin Skywalker was left to the eventual life of slavery and piracy, none of which bringing any semblance of balance to the Force. The two Sith would cement their eternal bond by allowing Dooku to place himself at a powerful seat inside the Senate, and by using the same tactics Plagueis did with the Jedi, they would turn the Senate in on itself, and out from the middle would rise the champion, Dooku. In a weird way, Plagueis turned Tyrannus into the superstar of both the Jedi and the Senate, and even though Plagueis never got official recognition, he got to enjoy what life was meant to be, a Sith-dominated galaxy. Tyrannus would never learn that his master manipulated his unconscious mind to murder hundreds of Jedi, but he would be a part of the beginning of a true Sith Order, one reborn on Morabon, and one that would be reborn of former Jedi and outlast the destroyed Order of old. Despite the Force creating chosen ones, as the Jedi would call them, there would be no rebirth of the Jedi, as the Republic became dominated for centuries by Lord Tyrannus and Sith influence. And that, my friends, is our neutral dark story. Special thanks to all of our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Wolf Lover 1997, Groot 36, Rosebird, Hunter Belden, Alexandria Reese The Beginning and End, Jango Fett Clone, Nick 5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir Willem 7067, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Colin Rooney, Shark Midori, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewu 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calig, Yelling Slayer 66, Mammoth Dudus, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, 460 Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, May 3 First Names, Darksing 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. So I really wanted to go with the mysterious aspect with this one. I felt like with Plagueis, he had to have this mystical aspect. Palpatine really finds Dooku late into his career, and because Plagueis is older, I think it makes sense for him to find him at a year where he's still like a young Jedi, one where he's easy to be manipulated but in a different way. And so I really wanted this kind of be the unfolding of dissension within the Jedi Order, where it's like this slow burn. It takes almost 2.5 decades to get to this point, but it's taking the concept of the Jedi Civil War and then making the Civil War come from within, but completely from something they couldn't control, something that they didn't see coming. And the sad part for Dooku is that all of that happens when he's not fully conscious. He's trying to be present for it, but every time he comes back, he's baffled by decisions made by the Jedi when they don't make any sense in his mind because he's been unconscious for it. So I hope you all enjoyed this kind of confusing and mystical story. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.